In this era of TV talent shows, all-powerful producers and lip-syncing celebrities, it seems like marketing savvy matters more than a musical gift. Was the pop music business always this way? My guest today is Robin Gibbs. With his brothers Morris and Barry, he formed the Bee-Gees, one of the most successful pop bands ever. Their soundtrack for the movie Saturday Night Fever defined the disco era. Were they really different from the packaged pop stars of today? Robin Gibb, welcome to Hard Talk.
Oh, thank you very much.
Imagine for a second that the Bee-Gees were setting out to make a career in the music business today. What do you think you would make of the pop industry right now?
I'm actually saddened by it because I don't think, quite honestly, it's karaoke. I mean, so how you ever pronounce the word elevator music, the people more posing as being artists than not. And it's not just about that. We're composers, first and foremost. And we have one of the biggest catalogues in the world, in fact, the biggest, alongside Lennon and McCartney. I mean, we've written for so many other artists apart from ourselves, from Barbara Streisand, Woman in Love, and Islands in the Stream, Chain Reaction, Heartbreak for Dionne Warwick, Emotion for Beyonce, and Words for Ronan Keating, and a host of songs. So we have a two-tier career. A lot of artists today, they just seem to be single artists that are chosen for these reality shows. And quite honestly, they probably never had a history of actually paying their dues and working their way in the industry.
And when you see a show here in the UK like The X Factor, which has an enormous influence on the charts, and which Simon Cowell produces, and of course he owns the rights to most of the acts that are successful as well, do you burn with resentment?
No, because I see these shows more as television shows rather than actual discovery of talent. And in essence, when these shows go off the air and these guys win, they're on their own. They've got to really prove themselves whether they sink or swim.
Sting, I think, he said that the danger is, and you mentioned the word karaoke, as did he says the danger is that it's putting popular music back decades.
Yeah.
I mean, is that really true?
Well, when we first started out, people always said, was it easier? Well, it was harder because you had to be able to sing. You had to have an act. You had to be able to sing live. And record companies would evaluate you on that because for promotion reasons, they wouldn't sign you. And it was much harder to get records on the radio. The standard was higher. And, of course, British music dominated the American charts, which doesn't do today.
No, these days, of course, they have something called auto-tune, which means that, if you look great and you've got a style which appeals to the audience, if you're not actually able to sing in tune, if your pitch isn't perfect, something can be done about it.
Yes.
Would the Bee-Gees have used it if they could have?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not, because we started writing songs when we were 8 years old and started natural harmony. Nobody ever taught us anything. So we did it out of fun. For nothing else. We started in Manchester just copying what we heard on the radio and imagining what their new single would be like. And as young as 8 or 9, we were actually imagining and composing music.
But Robin Gibb, isn't there a danger, and goodness knows I'm prone to it myself, of thinking that the good old days were always better? I mean, isn't the truth? And I saw it the other day.
Natural is better. If something real is always better. How often have you seen on a reality TV show like The X Factor a band that's been around professionally for a few years that have got their act together, can compose music, do their own songs, and do harmonies, which not many people can do natural harmonies.
Yeah, but point taken. But I was struck by something you said the other day about this sort of X Factor phenomenon. You described the successful ones on the shows as, quote, overstyled puppets, not musicians, simply a product. But I would put it to you, and I had this conversation recently with Martha Reeves of the Vandellas fame and Motown fame in that very chair you're in. And I said to her, in the end, Berry Gordy was treating the musicians that he had on the Motown label as a product, as a commodity to sell. And it's always happened in pop music.
I think, well, that's in the terms of Motown, that was probably conveyor belt kind of music. There was a host of that, and Hollanders in Holland were writing for a lot of host of artists. In our case, we've always composed our own music. We've been our own masters in a sense. We've never relied on other people to write our songs. Our whole catalogue has been composed by us, and we've never actually been taught anything about music.
Didn't your dad? I mean, it is fascinating how you came to be so good at music so young. Your dad pushed you very hard, didn't he? Because he was a band leader.
He didn't really. He didn't know exactly what we were doing. He was a band leader, but he never really knew what we were doing, because we actually did it on our own. It was much later where he actually discovered that because we were very young and we were going out to these places. It wasn't like LA where you were groomed.
No, well, you talk LA, and I mean, there is a concern these days about the sort of the pushing of child stars.
Yes.
Justin Bieber, goodness knows he's still a teenager. Britney Spears.
Yeah,
but
we never had that.
Well, it sort of happened to you when you moved to Australia as a family. Weren't you sort of pushed onto stages, into talent shows of the time yourself?
Only by enthusiasm, because that's something we wanted to do. 4BH was a radio station in Brisbane. They offered us, or Bill Gates, who named us the Bee Gees, wanted us to go into and cut acetate so we could play on his drive time show. And we loved that, you see. And
but you were young at the time, weren't you? In your early teens?
No, 8, 9.
8 or 9.
Yeah, and Barry was about 11.
So you were one of these child stars who was pushed onto stage, and isn't there something a little bit dangerous about that?
Well, actually, we were doing it even. Our father was a bush photographer working in the outback of Queensland, and we were doing these things like Redcliffe Speedway. This is where Bill Gates discovered it, and he didn't know anything about it. He was a bit concerned, though, when he came back, because, we were minors.
You developed quickly, and as part of your development, you actually came back from Australia to the UK. You must have been, 17 when you sang that. Also, it's a very folky, a very hippie sort of sound.
Yeah, and a lot of these songs in our catalogue are still on the radio. I mean, I can actually go and on the radio, I can turn the radio on any given commercial station, including the BBC, and hear 5 Gibb Brothers songs a day, also in America at the same time, as well as here in Europe, because of all the other artists that we've written for, as well as ourselves. And
but I'm tempted when I watch Massachusetts, to say, what happened? What happened to your sound? Because it changed so radically in just a few years.
Because we're composers, you see, and composers don't feel, and because of and we've been writing for so long, we felt we had license to go into areas where other people would fear to go, especially older artists, because we were so young.
Were you really stretching and challenging yourselves, or were you just casting about to find the most commercially successful sound?
Well, composers just like to be adventurous. We were having fun. It's like Islands in the Stream is the most successful country song, and we've never really lived in Memphis or Nashville. And for Dolly Parton, and it's just, we're not country artists, but we wrote that. But we've always loved R&B and even soul. And
well, the soul being a key word, because for a while after Massachusetts, and a few other hits which were sort of more hippie folky,
yes,
you really adopted this sort of funk soul thing, and you were called the Blue-Eyed Soul Boys.
Yeah,
but you left the UK to develop that sound, didn't you? You went to Miami.
We had to, and we worked with Arif Mardin, who was a brilliant producer. Well, there was a point where we wanted to explore what we were doing. We were composers. We were still very young. We wanted the transition. We wanted to explore American music and black music particularly, because it was where we felt the future was going to be.
But it's when you mentioned Arif Mardin, and he said, I saw the quote the other day, he said, what he wanted you to do was to forget, and his words, forget that you were 3 white boys from Manchester.
Yes.
How easy was that?
Well, the fact of the matter is, he loved the harmonies and he loved the writing. But he just saw us as composers and recording artists, which is what we loved doing. And we never worried about image or anything like that. And all we cared about, we lived and breathed the recording studio. And although Arif was then a great producer, we did all the work, we did all the composing. He was just the guy that said, that's it, cut that, do that and that. But the thing was, we did live and breathe, and it was in the studio. Nothing waited until tomorrow. If something sounded good to him, you do it today.
So here we have the 3 Gibb brothers, and you're playing around with different styles, and you've got the ability to catch different moods. How did you get to that sound that's always associated with you, which is the falsetto?
Well, in those days, it was licensed. I mean, the falsetto has always been used by the Four Seasons, which is Jersey Boys, most of everyone. And of course, you've got people like the Stones have used falsetto. Prince the most beautiful girl in the world. I mean, it's always
Well, that's all
been
true,
there.
but why is it that, frankly, you and the Bee Gees are almost stuck with that particular style of singing,
Well, because you've got to remember that that particular piece of music around it was the biggest selling soundtrack album of all time. It still is. And there is nothing, it's equating to Walking on the Moon. There's nothing really touched the sales of that apart from Pepper and Thriller. They're the 3 biggest selling albums in history.
Well,
the thing about it is it was no hype, because in those days you couldn't really hype anything. It was purely organic. Unlike today, of course, where everything is hype.
But, and here is the big but, your own brother Morris later said it became our albatross.
Albatross. Well, that's quite true, as a lot of things for people. Because
do you still feel that when you watch it today? Do you think, in many ways,
actually, no, well,
it would have been better if it hadn't been that way for the Bee Gees, if we weren't so defined by that particular
John Lennon
sound?
said in his last interview with Playboy magazine that he wished he'd had a Saturday night fever in his career, because he loved singles. And I knew John Lennon, he loved singles. And I love singles. The fact is, it's like Captain Kirk of the Enterprise. He always saw that as an albatross and came to love it. I actually am very proud of Saturday Night Fever now, because I don't think, many people would actually like to have a fever. It's not something you can plan or engineer.
Did it bug you that it became something that others in the business poked fun at? And, you had the satirical bands like the Heebie-Jeebies sort of poking.
Well, there are tribute bands at that time, but there are many tribute bands that are of the Bee Gees today, all around the world. And not many people have, tribute bands that are paying tribute to them or making a living out of being you. The fact is, it had an impact on the culture. And there are people who have hit records and there are people who have impacts on the culture. Fever did, there is no doubt about it. People use the word staying alive and the expression fever with everything. And it is no doubt undisputed part of the music culture.
You mentioned John Lennon there, and there's something about the Beatles and other huge bands which I think is almost a given in rock music. That is, there's always a difficult dynamic within bands.
Yeah.
Beatles, it was John and Paul.
Yeah.
You could say, bringing it more up to date, Oasis, it was Noel and Liam.
Yeah.
Obviously, in the Stones, it was Keith and Mick.
Right.
You were a family band. You were a band of brothers.
A band of brothers.
How did it work in the Bee Gees?
Well, there's always going to be dynamics in any group, whether you're brothers or not. People always say, well, you've been together for so long because you're brothers. Brothers never really stay together because they're brothers. They usually part. We stay together because we shared the same...
You tried to quit. You tried to quit when you were, I think, 19
Very
years
early,
old.
yeah. And
was that because there were power relationships in the Bee Gees group that you couldn't cope with?
It happens. It happened with Oasis, and it's called First Success. And it does happen when you feel that you want to spread your wings a little bit on your own. I don't think we split up so much as that we showed up. I showed up at the studio. We were on our own, but we were still learning the ropes. We were still developing, and when you have success very young, it goes to your head very quickly. And you had problems at the time. I know you had some drugs problems with amphetamines, and I think your brothers and indeed your father were extraordinarily worried about you for a while. Well, yeah, but everybody in those days, the late 60s, everybody was like that. That was really the hardest thing I've ever done. I mean, I never took anything harder than that, except only for working in the studio. I mean, I never took the hard drugs at all. Never took LSD, heroin, crack.
Not then and not ever. Not ever.
Ever. In my life, only that. And that was really just to stay up all night and work in the studio, which we did.
Because the tragedy of the brothers Gibb is that one brother, Andy, younger brother, who wasn't part of the Bee Gees, but you were very close to, he fell foul of drugs in a much more terrible way.
Oh, he did. But that's not how he died. He died on his 30th birthday from myocarditis. He did have a problem years earlier with drugs, but by the time he died, he was actually clean. He did have a virus which came in the heart, which was not a bacterial virus, which came to, and anyone could tell you myocarditis is for life, but if you run down, it will claim you.
In retrospect, do you think it was good for the family dynamic, all your relationships with parents, brothers, everything, that the Bee Gees had such remarkable success and became such public figures?
Yes, I do. It's what you dream about. I think I don't know anything else, and I don't think I would do anything any different. I love music. I'm working with the Royal Philharmonic with my son at the moment, RJ, on the Titanic Requiem, which is for 2012, and which is fantastic. And I'll be working with my brother next year. There's some very big things occurring with the Bee Gees next year, especially in America.
Well, I have to stop you there because it's interesting. You couldn't have said that a few years ago. There's big things happening with the Bee Gees because after the tragic death of Morris, your twin brother, within a week or so, you did say the Bee Gees as a unit, will never be recreated without Morris. And yet now here you are talking about the Bee Gees.
In terms of project, it is projects that are actually related to the catalogue that we've written and what's going to be happening with that catalogue in terms of major players in the United States, which will affect the whole world. And you have to remember, in the States, you get something like the Beatles, 24 or 26 number ones in the States. We've written and recorded and produced 22 US number ones, which is more than any other British act, apart from the Beatles.
But you and Barry do go on stage together now.
When we cherry pick.
Yeah, but when you do that, do you feel you are doing it as Bee Gees, or is it something very different now?
Well, the Bee Gees is something that we created. It's our creation. In a way, it's almost abstract, when you say Bee Gees, because it's just a name. But we also see ourselves as the creators of that, the chief composers, the chief sound. Even though you don't engineer it, it's just something that happens. You don't really know you are actually coming across a sound. But we're the major creators, and in a sense, whether we're the Bee Gees or the Gibb brothers, which is Bee Gees backwards, I suppose, it's just what we are.
Whatever it is, you're still doing it. I just want, I was struck by something.
But we cherry pick the things that we do live shows. But the catalogue is so big that it is used, and it's in movies all the time. It's on the radio. It's a living catalogue on time, which we are very proud of.
Well, and people all over the world know your music. There's no doubt about that. But you did say once, and I think this is quite a reflective comment, and you've been through tough times in your life. You've been very open about that.
I've been in train crashes too, the Green train crash. Well, when I was 17 doing them last year, that was when nearly 80 people were killed in that.
Well, here's what you said, and it just seems to me it's an interesting sort of juxtaposition with a lot of your up-tempo, your very positive music. You said an artist is an artist because he's not happy with the world. So, as a result, he creates his own existence.
And Charles Dickens said the same thing. It's an extension of yourself, because no matter how much you use your art to actually fill the void within you, but it's a never-ending void, because no matter how much, you'll never be satisfied. The void is always there.
Is it? In your life? This sort of void that drives your creativity is as much there today as it ever was.
Yeah. And I don't think you can say, I retire at a certain point or do that. It's just something you have to do in your blood until you drop.
So if you got too happy, if you were just too happy in your material world, would you not be able to write music anymore?
I think I don't think there's any such thing as actual happiness, but there is contentment. Contentment for me is actually is writing and composing and creating. I don't think, as Churchill said, rest is rust. I don't think I'd like to stand still and just look at the sunset.
Yeah, well, you actually rather neatly linked into another of your interests. You mentioned Churchill. You have become somewhat preoccupied with a particular campaign, and that campaign is to get more recognition, indeed a massive new national monument for the young men who gave their lives for Britain in bomber command.
Absolutely,
that is, those who flew the bombers in the sorties.
55,000 of them, which have never been recognised for 70 years. Between the ages of 22, which not just laid down their lives for this country, but for all of Europe and Nazi-occupied Europe, not for the German people, but for the Nazis.
Well, I'll tell you what intrigues me about this. You were born after the end of the Second World War. You've actually lived this sort of international life. You have a home in Florida. You've spent some of your youth in Australia. You are truly a sort of international person. Why have you developed this particular obsession, which is, a very British obsession?
It is. Well, it's a world thing, because they were always seen as heroes. Even in Australia and America, they actually admire what these guys did, because they really ended the war and brought peace and freedom to a Europe which affected the world, including Germany itself.
Yes, you've just come back from Germany, and you probably know better than I do that some Germans, because of the scale of the monument you want to put up, they have real problems with it. I'm just thinking now about the mayor of Dresden, Helmer Orus, who has said that she thinks what you are proposing for London, this big monument, is contrary to Dresden's notion of what remembrance is all about. Another councillor in Dresden called it utterly tasteless.
Well, from the point of view, I mean, I've got the backing of Boris Johnson and the Prime Minister and Nick Clegg right from the outset, and it's been passed by Westminster Council. It is going ahead, but the fact is, yes, of course they're going to be bitter about it, but this is an anti-war memorial. It's about showing young people that peace and democracy and justice are not just given things. They're not to be taken for granted. And these guys never got to see the freedom that they created, not just for the German people, for the whole world. And they did it without any reservations at all. They did because they had to do it.
And without wishing to sound like a pop psychologist, are you doing this partly because maybe you feel your life has been too easy in a way? Is that why you are so interested in these young men who had to make the ultimate sacrifice?
They haven't been recognised. Of all the armed divisions, they have not been, and lost the most, of course, they have not been recognised for 70 years. And when you've got monuments for animals in Park Lane...
Why a pop star, with all the millions you've made,
pop star,
wants to turn their attention to this
composer and musician is better than pop star, but popular music it's not just...
Fair point, but why then such a successful popular musician has developed this particular interest?
And it certainly had an effect. The fact of the matter is, these guys are heroes. They should be honoured. And it's something that the whole country has supported, including newspapers. And it's actually, we're up to the point now where it's actually even been designed and passed.
And it will happen.
And it will happen.
All right, Robin
Be
Gibbs.
there at the unveiling.
Thank you very much, Robin Gibbs. Thanks for being on Hard Talk.